If I were to come at you on the street and ask you, what is the best book you've ever read? You'd find me a creep. Now, we're not on the street, we're on the internet, so it's a little bit more acceptable for me to ask you, what's the best book you've ever read? Please comment the answer below if you have one. But because this is my video, you'll get my answer, which actually is a little harder. A lot of you, like me, come up with a title but quickly dismiss it. Why? Because we have this little voice in our heads telling us, really? Is that the best book you've ever read? It's really hard to have this internal debate. You come up with some titles, dismiss them too, and that's because you don't really have a criteria for judging books. Or, as you'll see in this video, I will define a criteria for judging pieces of media in general and applying it to books. So, in my quest to find what the best book is, I first have to define what a good book is. And to find that, I need to define what a good piece of media is. To define what a good piece of media is, of course, I need to have some criteria. But criteria can't come out of the blue. So, firstly, we have to define what we are working with. What is a book? Well, that's rather a silly question. This is a book, right? And also this is a book. They're words on pages and bound by covers in general, but this is also a book. So yes, there are books that have multiple physical or digital representations, but that's not really the purpose of the video. In this one we're talking about ideas, about the contents of the book. What's written in them. Based on what's written inside, books can be separated into different categories. For example, the simplest separation would be into fiction and non-fiction. Now, although comparison between the categories is possible, as we'll see later, it's rather difficult sometimes. Here we are talking about greatness, about the value of something, and it would be quite difficult to assess that in non-fiction books, for example. Also, if we take into considerations all types of books, a criteria for defining what's good about them might be quite hard to find. For example, if we are to compare something about metaphysics to something about cooking, what's the greatness in that? We have to find firstly something in common that they have in order to be able to compare them. And that would be quite difficult. Same would go for history and technology, for example. A great book might be the C programming language, but what would really be the criteria? If we are talking about how influential a work is, well, either the Bible or the IKEA catalog would be the greatest book of all time. Just imagine how many people bought that furniture, really. So these are the reasons why in this video I'm going to be sticking to literature. Because in literature, in fiction, you have a self-contained world that's separated from real implications, really, and I can judge it based only on itself, not on other outside factors. But what should the criteria be? Now, in this section we are going to be talking about aesthetics, and I prefer the spelling with E, not AE, so no cottage academia girl boys here. No, aesthetics is the field of philosophy that deals with questions such as what is nice and what does beautiful mean. So what is beautiful might be something very different based on the time you're in and the region you're in. So for example, in 15th, 16th century Japan, what was considered beautiful is very different from modern day, I don't know, America or ancient Greece, for example. One considers black teeth nice, the others don't. And although the field of aesthetics doesn't really give us a clear answer on what a good book is, it does give us multiple ways in which we can view the question. For example, we can discuss how clear the message of something is, and that could very well work for non-fiction books. But we are sticking with fiction here. We can critique them in a stylistical way, basically deciding how much of a certain style is present in a work. We can try to analyze the structure of something, or we can try to deduce how the author might have thought about the world based on the book, or rather we can take the author out of the equation and just say once something is done, it's out there in the world and the world gives it meaning. Although there are many ways in which we can critique works, the only way I find myself comfortable discussing is an impressionistic way, basically meaning what does it make me feel? Because I'm not a professional, the feelings, the thoughts that a work produces are the only things I feel comfortable in sharing, and because they're mine, they are true, at least in my universe, so they can't be really taken from a more objective point of view. Those were the feelings and the impressions I had when I read the book in this case. So this is what I'm going to be sticking with, an impressionistic analysis. And that swiftly, well, as swiftly as I can, brings us to... Okay, so now we're getting to the criteria, or basically what I'm looking at in the media. The first one that naturally comes to my mind at least is enjoyment. If I enjoy something, then that something is good. It's like when your mom or dad cooks. You might enjoy it a lot, and in your mind it's good, but to other people it might not be that good, because they didn't really enjoy it. Now you might be asking, is this all? And that would mean that basically if you enjoy something, then that something is very good. And if you think a little about it, if you analyze it a little, it might not be the whole story. Let's take movies, for example. There are a lot of movies that are really bad, but also really enjoyable. There's a cult following for the movie The Room, if you have seen it, or Plan 9 from Outer Space, which is a horrendous movie, but it's really fun to watch. If you watch one of those bad movies, or read a bad book, or watch a bad TV series, or whatever, and you still enjoy it, it's probably because you're not viewing it just in the context of its own story. When you're watching Plan 9 from Outer Space, you're thinking, man, sorry about that. Man, that's a horrendous movie. It's so bad and so lacks so much self-awareness that it becomes funny to laugh at, but not with. Basically, something bad can be still enjoyable if you kind of meta-view it. You view it in the context of everything that you've seen thus far, and comparing it to them and seeing how bad it is and how much it doesn't know that it's bad, and it's trying to trick you into thinking it's good. When you're putting all of that into context, it's funny to watch something as horrible as that. Whenever you're seeing one of these bad movies, you're never laughing because it's a comedy. You're laughing at how bad the acting is, or you're enjoying just seeing the faces of the people who don't realize the mistakes they've made in the creation of that thing. So basically, people like to make fun of things, and thus that thing becomes enjoyable. But it's not only that. Bad things can be enjoyable too, through nostalgia, for example. A lot of nostalgic things are really enjoyable for people, even though they aren't, when you look deeper into it, that good. Just because you've played something in the past doesn't mean it's good now, but for you, it will be much more enjoyable. So basically, with just enjoyment, we don't really have a method of differentiating between laughing at something and laughing with something, and between comparing stuff that you like because what they are, or like because your experience with them. And I propose immersion as a second criteria. Immersion almost has a transcendental value. It's the power of the media to pull you in its world and make you part of it. Basically, if you're immersed in something, you're much more emotionally available to the ideas and to feeling the feelings that are trying to be transmitted. You're much more open to the message and what the characters, what the writing is trying to say to you. Basically, when you're immersed in something, you fully open yourself up to what that something is trying to say, even if not on a conscious level. Basically, you're just absorbing all that the piece of media has to say to you. And a lot of times, the reason you're not enjoying something, or even though you know you should be feeling something, for example, is because you're not immersed. And thus we have our two criteria for now: enjoyment and immersion. We can even graph them like this. This is why I have the whiteboard here, with immersion here and enjoyment. Basically this goes from 0 to good, let's say 100 and 0, and so here. And basically we are going to be looking at this quadrant here. This is good. This is things that are both enjoyable and immersive. You can also have things that are here. They aren't immersive, but they are enjoyable. Again, things you liked in the past, for example, or things that you laugh at. And here we have The Room, to give a movie example, because I think it's one most people will understand. You also have here things that aren't enjoyable and they aren't immersive either. This is just boring. Bad. This is the stuff that you don't enjoy, you don't like it, and you don't know about because you don't search for this type of shit. And you also have stuff that isn't enjoyable, but is immersive. These are the things that don't really say anything to you. They pull you in their world, but after a while you don't like the world. They are technically good. This stuff is technically good. They have the power of putting you in a world created by imagination, with decent characters that make sense, but you don't like them. So here I would personally give an example from anime. I didn't like Neon Genesis Evangelion. Other people did. It's a decent show, it's well crafted, but I didn't really enjoy it. And then again, this is what we are looking at. This is best. And thus, we are searching for books that put us in an interesting and immersive world that we also enjoy. Thus, bring the books. So finally, after all of that exposure, basically, we can get at the task at hand, the one we began with. What is the best book I've ever read? And for this, it wasn't that difficult. I just had to choose the first books that came to mind. When I looked at the library, the books that first hit me were 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, The Sound of the Mountain by Yasunari Kawabata, A Wild Ship Chase by Haruhi Murakami, Der Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse, Zorba the Greek by Nikos Kazantzakis, A Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger, and finally Le Chien du Printemps by Patrick Modiano. The last one, I don't know yet the title in English. It will be somewhere on the screen because I've read the translation and they sometimes change the title. So after compiling this list, I came to ponder, were there any other books that could fit on here? And whilst doing that, the same feeling from the beginning hit me, that feeling of not being sure. And I sat with it, and I made the script for this video. And then I came to a conclusion. There's another variable I haven't considered: time. This basically filled the holes, the uncertainties that I had until now. Time changes your vision of something. Time changes how much you like something. So there are some things that you like in the beginning when you consume them and like just as much when thinking back. For example, for me, Zorba the Greek, I liked it very much when I read it. It was one of my favorite books, and still after a year and a half, after 2 years almost of me reading it, I still like it just as much when thinking back. There are also some things that grow on you. They start at so and so, and then over time, when you think back, they are better. Although I don't have examples from literature of this. I have one from anime, Code Geass. I didn't really enjoy it that much when I watched it, but now every time I think back of it, I enjoy it more. Of course, there are some things that you read and like, but lose their edge over time in your memory. For example, for me, a lot of Murakami's books actually, especially A Wild Ship Chase. I liked it a lot when I read it last spring, I think, almost a year ago. And when I compiled the list, because this was compiled in November, I started the script in November and I'm just now finishing it. It was still one of my favorite books, although now thinking back of it, there's something lacking, and maybe I'll go into more detail because all of Murakami's books have this feeling for me. But every time I think back of it, I'm thinking, did I really enjoy it that much? Was it just because it was something new? And then, of course, things that start out bad and remain bad. But again, we are searching for the best, not for the worst, so those don't concern us now. And this time variable is regardless of your impression at the time of the immersion and enjoyment I settled in the last part. So basically this is just the lingering feeling that you get over an extended period of time. So with all of this in mind, I looked at the books and, I started analyzing them. Some of them were great. Some of them made me think I need to read this again, especially Steppenwolf, because there's almost a cryptic feeling when you get reading it. Other things I remember enjoying a lot, but slowly became more mild in my mind, I guess. But honestly, it's a battle between two. The first two books that came to mind when doing this were The Sound of the Mountain and Zorba the Greek. Now, originally, when I planned this video back in October or November 2023, The Sound of the Mountain was the best book I had ever read. It has a light quality, I guess. It's almost poetic in its writing, and it depicts life from a view that I haven't really seen done much. Honestly, I could spend a lot of time talking about it, because it really impressed me a lot. But time has passed, and I think Zorba the Greek is the best book I've ever read. Yeah, I'm not going to make this long. Honestly, right now, that's the best book I have ever read, and I encourage you to read it too. It depicts an outlook of life that I haven't seen elsewhere, and a passion for living, basically. I know you, like some people told me, might call it a little bit romantic. I don't really think that's true, but you can argue whatever you want. It's the impression you've felt, honestly. If you want to hear me talk more about books, movies, I guess media in general, or any other thing, just comment below. Lastly, thank you for watching. Subscribe.